So I, 32F, have been with Danny, 34M, for 6 years, married for 4. Or I should say, was with him, because that whole situation imploded spectacularly at Thanksgiving dinner 2 days ago. I've been doom scrolling this sub forever but never thought I'd be posting my own drama. Yet here we are. Sorry in advance for the length. For background, my sister Sloane, 30F, has always been a lot. Growing up, she was constantly trying to one-up me. If I mentioned I was going to the mall with friends, suddenly she'd already made plans to go there. If I got a new phone, she'd need the newer model within a week. It wasn't just with material stuff either. Any achievement or milestone of mine would somehow become about her. Our parents tried talking to her about it when we were teenagers, but eventually they just started saying that's just how Sloane is, and expected me to deal with it. So I did, mostly by ignoring it because honestly, who has the energy for that? Danny came into my life at my friend Ariana's housewarming. He was funny in a dry way that matched my humor, remembered details about conversations, like my weird obsession with 90s cartoons, and didn't talk over me when I shared opinions. We moved in together after a year and a half, got a dog named Parker, half lab, half mystery floof, and eventually had a small wedding at this cute local venue with a greenhouse. Nothing fancy. I wore a simple dress from BHLDN. We had a food truck instead of catering, and our first dance was to a Spotify playlist because the DJ canceled last minute. It was perfectly imperfect. Sloane was my maid of honor. Family obligation, sigh. Her speech was basically a TED talk about how she gave us her blessing and a weird story about how some guy at a bar once mistook them for twins. Whatever. The mini tacos were amazing, and Danny seemed perfect, so I let it slide like I always did with her attention grabbing. For the first few years, things were good. We bought a small fixer-upper that constantly had something breaking. Most recently, the dishwasher flooded the kitchen at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. We took Parker to the dog park on weekends, binged the same shows on Netflix, and had inside jokes about the weird neighbor who exclusively wears Hawaiian shirts. Normal, boring stuff that made me happy. The first thing that seemed off happened back in April. Danny started being super weird about his phone. Like, he'd literally jump if I walked near him while he was texting. He said he was just responding to work stuff, but he'd never been so jumpy before. Then he started working late a lot or having guys' nights that he was weirdly vague about. Classic red flags that I somehow convinced myself were nothing because I didn't want to be that wife who gets suspicious over nothing. Around the same time, Sloane started showing up at our house at the strangest times. She'd text saying she was in the neighborhood and wanted to drop by, but half the time I wasn't even home. Danny would tell me later, "Oh yeah, Sloane stopped by to borrow that cake pan," or "Sloane needed our Wi-Fi password for something." It happened enough times that I jokingly asked if they were planning a surprise party for me, and Danny got all flustered and changed the subject. Sloane's text to me got weird too. She kept asking how things were with Danny, if we ever fought, if married life was everything I hoped for. I figured she was just in another one of her comparison phases, maybe seeing someone new and trying to measure her relationship against mine. LOL, if I only knew. The thing that finally tipped me off wasn't even anything major. About 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I was scrolling through Instagram while Danny was in the shower, and I noticed Sloane had posted a story of her self-care Sunday, showing off a new perfume. It was the exact same perfume I'd been smelling on Danny's shirts. Not his usual cologne, but this specific flowery scent I couldn't place until that moment. That night after Danny fell asleep, I did something I'd never done before. I checked his phone. He always had a passcode, but I knew it was our anniversary. Basic, I know. There were dozens of messages from Sloane. Heart emojis, late-night texts, plans to meet up when I would be out of the way, pictures I wish I could unsee. The most recent text from her said, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." She suspects nothing, right? I didn't sleep at all that night. I just laid there next to him, wondering how I missed this, how long it had been happening, and what I was supposed to do now. I didn't cry. I didn't wake him up for a confrontation. I just felt empty, and then weirdly calm. Like when you're so overwhelmed that your brain just decides to stop processing emotions temporarily. The next morning, I acted completely normal. Made coffee, kissed him goodbye, went about my day. But inside, my mind was racing. I'd always been the go-with-the-flow person, the one who avoided conflict. That day, something shifted. I decided I wouldn't just react, I would prepare. Over the next few weeks, I quietly got my ducks in a row. I documented everything, took screenshots and emailed them to a new Gmail account they didn't know about. I went through our finances and made notes of everything we owned together versus separately. I found a month-to-month apartment that allowed dogs. I packed a bug-out bag with essentials and hid it in my car trunk, all while smiling through Danny's obvious lies and Sloane's fake sister chats. Thanksgiving has always been a big deal in our family. My mom goes all out, matching plates, name cards, the works. This year, it was at my parents' place with the usual crowd. My parents, my brother Albert and his wife, a couple of aunts and uncles, Sloane and Danny and me. Mom had spent days cooking. The table was beautiful, with her special china and these little DIY pinecone turkeys she found on Pinterest. Everyone was in that post-meal food coma, moving to the living room for coffee and pie, when Sloane stood up and tapped her glass with a spoon like we were at a wedding toast. I knew. Somehow, in that moment, I just knew what was coming. "I have an announcement," she said, looking around the room with this weird smile. She was wearing this low-cut sweater she'd definitely bought for the occasion, her hair freshly highlighted. She glanced at me for a second before continuing. "I just wanted to let everyone know that Danny and I have been seeing each other," she announced, her voice practically dripping with fake remorse. "It's been going on for a while now. We didn't mean for it to happen, but we're in love." She reached for Danny's hand across the table. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "We wanted to be honest with everyone, especially you, Layla. I'm sorry you had to find out this way." The room went completely silent. My mom's hand flew to her chest. My dad set down his pie fork with a clank. Albert muttered something under his breath that would definitely get him in trouble with Mom later. One of my aunts audibly gasped like we were in a telenovela. Everyone turned to look at me. I could feel their eyes waiting for the tears, the screaming, the dramatic exit. Sloane was watching me with this look part pity, part triumph, waiting for me to break down so she could comfort me and look like the bigger person somehow. Instead, I smiled. Not a small, sad smile. A genuine, almost amused grin that visibly threw her off balance. "Oh, I've known for weeks," I said, taking a casual sip of my wine. "Since November 3rd, actually. Thanks for finally bringing it into the open, though. Saves me the trouble." The look on both their faces was honestly priceless. Danny's mouth literally dropped open. Sloane's smug expression froze, then crumbled. "You knew?" Danny stammered. "How?" I shrugged. "You're not exactly subtle. The late nights, the password-protected phone that you jump to grab whenever I come near, the mysterious work emergencies that always happen when Sloane is conveniently free. Plus, you've been using her perfume as your excuse for why your clothes smell different." I turned to Sloane. "FYI, that glossier you sent is super distinctive. Maybe try something less recognizable next time you're having an affair." "But you didn't say anything," Sloane said, obviously thrown that her big dramatic moment was falling flat. "You've been acting normal." "Yeah, well, I needed time to figure some things out." I set down my wine glass and stood up. "Like where I'm going to live now that I'm leaving both of you in my dust." "Layla, we should talk about this privately," Danny started, finally finding his voice. He had that placating tone he used when trying to talk me down from being upset about something, like when he forgot our anniversary last year. "Nothing to talk about," I said, grabbing my purse from the back of my chair. "Actually, there is one thing you should know." I looked directly at Sloane. "He's been talking to Pamela from his office too, for at least a month. Those working late nights weren't all with you." Sloane's head whipped toward Danny, who had gone pale. "What is she talking about?" I couldn't help laughing. "You really thought you were special? That's cute. Check his Snapchat if you don't believe me. Oh wait, you probably don't know his passcode for that one." I turned to my stunned family. "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry about the holiday drama. The sweet potato casserole was amazing as always. I'll call you tomorrow." As I walked toward the door, I heard Sloane and Danny starting to argue behind me. My mom called my name, her voice worried, but I just waved without turning around. "I've got this," I said. "Enjoy the pie, and maybe save me a slice for later. I have a feeling I'm going to be hungry once the adrenaline wears off." I got in my car and drove straight to my new apartment, where Parker was already waiting for me. I'd dropped him off that morning with his bed and toys. As I pulled away, my phone started blowing up with texts and calls, but I silenced it and connected to Spotify instead. "Thank You Next" came on shuffle, and I actually laughed out loud at how perfect that was. Because while walking out might have seemed like the end of the story, it was actually just the beginning of what I had planned. They had no idea what was coming next. To be continued. Edit. OMG, thank you for all the awards and supportive comments. I honestly posted this thinking like 5 people would read it. I'll update soon with part 2 when I have time to write everything out properly. First update. Okay, so first of all, thanks for all the insane support on my last post. My notifications literally broke and I had to turn them off. Never expected that many people would care about my messy life drama, LOL. Several of you asked for updates, so here we go. So remember how I mentioned finding those texts on Danny's phone? Let me back up and tell you exactly how that went down. Because it wasn't just a random let me check his messages moment. It was a Sunday morning. Danny had gone for a run, and I was just hanging around in bed scrolling through TikTok when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't even look twice, but it buzzed like 5 times in a row, which was weird for 7:30 a.m. on a weekend. When I glanced over, I saw Sloane's name on the screen with a message preview that just said, "Last night was," and then it cut off. Something in my gut just dropped. Like when you miss a step going downstairs. Danny had come home super late the night before from what he claimed was drinks with the guys. He'd been weirdly showered and minty fresh when he crawled into bed around 2 a.m. I remember thinking it was strange, but had brushed it off because, honestly, who wants to be the paranoid wife? Anyway, his phone was right there, and something just felt so off that I picked it up. He didn't have a passcode. Dumb, I know. Which should have been my first clue he wasn't exactly criminal mastermind material. The full message from Sloane read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to feel your hands on me again. When can you get away this week?" I sat there for a solid 5 minutes just staring at those words. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. I scrolled up through their messages, and it was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Hundreds of texts going back months. Plans to meet at hotels. Photos I'm still trying to bleach from my brain. Inside jokes about me and how clueless I was. The worst part? They had a whole system. When Danny said he was working late, he was with her. When Sloan told me she was dating some new guy who she wasn't ready to introduce yet, it was Danny. They'd even hooked up at our house when I went to visit my college roommate for a weekend in August. After I gathered myself enough to function, I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself, then deleted the emails from Danny's sent folder. I put his phone back exactly how I found it and went to take the longest shower of my life, where I ugly cried until the water ran cold. When Danny got back from his run, I somehow managed to act normal. I don't even know how. I made pancakes and smiled and talked about some dumb show we'd been watching, all while feeling like my insides had been hollowed out with a rusty spoon. That whole day was surreal, like I was watching myself from outside my body, playing the role of clueless happy wife while actually dying inside. But something weird happened by that evening. My sadness started morphing into this cold, calm anger. Not the throwing plates at walls kind, but the quiet, calculating kind. The next day, while Danny was at work, I called in sick and spent hours researching divorce lawyers. Found a badass woman named Melissa who had this whole cheating spouse specialty. When we met for a consultation, she laid out all my options. Turns out Massachusetts, where we live, is a no-fault state, but evidence of infidelity can impact property division and other stuff. She took one look at the screenshots and said, "We can work with this." Over the next 2 weeks, I was basically living a double life. During the day, I was still just regular Layla, going to work, making dinner, watching Netflix with Danny, but every spare moment was spent preparing for nuclear fallout. Opened my own bank account at a totally different bank and transferred my personal savings, $6,500, that I'd had since before we were married. Made copies of all our financial records, tax returns, investment statements. Took photos of everything valuable in our house and created a spreadsheet of what was mine pre-marriage. Found an apartment with a month-to-month lease that allowed dogs, bless them. Started slowly moving irreplaceable stuff to a storage unit. Family photos, my grandma's jewelry, important documents. Contacted 3 moving companies for quotes. Changed all my passwords and created new accounts for everything. Netflix, Spotify, etc. Took Parker to the vet to update his microchip info to just my name. I also started documenting everything. Every time Danny lied about where he was going, every suspicious text, every time Sloan just happened to know something about our plans that I hadn't told her. The hardest part was maintaining the act, having to smile when Danny kissed me goodbye each morning, knowing where his lips had been, having regular phone calls with Sloan where she'd ask weirdly specific questions about my marriage. One time, she literally asked if Danny and I were having any problems with this fake concerned voice. The audacity, I swear. Oh, and get this. While I was gathering intel, I discovered they weren't just having a physical affair. They'd been financially shady too. Danny had loaned Sloan almost $4,000 from our joint account over the past few months. Money that was supposed to be going toward our future home renovation. He'd labeled the transfers as contractor deposits in our banking app, but I found the real receipts. Melissa, my lawyer, was particularly interested in that detail. The week before Thanksgiving was the hardest. I'd finalized most of my escape plan, but keeping up the charade was draining me. I started having trouble sleeping. Lost like 8 pounds because food just tasted like cardboard. Parker definitely knew something was up because he wouldn't leave my side. Then came the plan, not just leaving Danny, but making sure both he and Sloan understood exactly what they'd done. I didn't want some dramatic screaming match or basic revenge like keying his car. I wanted something more comprehensive. So 3 days before Thanksgiving, I officially signed my new lease and paid the deposit and first month's rent, moved Parker and his stuff to the new place. Told Danny he was at a doggy daycare special event. Had the locks changed on our house while Danny was at work. Perfectly legal since my name is on the deed too. Transferred my half of our joint account to my new account, leaving his direct deposits and bill payments untouched. Again, legally in the clear according to Melissa. Packed a suitcase with enough clothes for 2 weeks. Left printed copies of all the evidence, texts, photos, bank transfers, in a folder on the kitchen counter along with divorce papers. Took the good coffee maker. This was petty, but it was a hill I was willing to die on. The folder had 3 copies of everything. One for Danny, one for my parents, in a sealed envelope to open after Thanksgiving dinner, and one that I kept with me to distribute to key family members after Sloan's big announcement. Which brings us to Thanksgiving Day. I knew something was going to happen because Sloan had been acting weird all week, sending me these cryptic texts about how the truth will set you free and other fortune cookie BS. I just didn't know she'd choose to blow up our entire family's holiday. When she made her grand announcement, the look on her face was expectant, like she was waiting for me to collapse into tears so she could comfort me and look like the bigger person somehow. The way she kept glancing between me and our parents made it clear this was all orchestrated for maximum drama, but instead she got my prepared "I already know and I've got receipts" response, which completely threw her off script. The silence in the room after I spoke was so thick you could cut it with the serving knife still stuck in the turkey. As I was leaving, my brother Albert followed me out to the porch and was like, "What the actual," but stopped himself. He looked so confused and angry on my behalf. I hugged him and promised to explain everything later, then got in my car and drove off. What I didn't mention in my last post is what happened after I left. According to Albert, who called me later that night, absolute chaos erupted. Danny tried to follow me, but my dad physically blocked the door. Sloan started crying these fake tears about how they never meant to hurt anyone and love just happened. My mom, who is normally the family peacekeeper, apparently told them both to get out of her house. Albert said he's never seen her that angry. The best part? As Danny and Sloan were leaving, I guess my dad handed Danny the sealed envelope I'd left, the one with all the screenshots and evidence. Albert said Danny opened it right there on the front steps, and Sloan kept trying to grab the papers from him. When she finally saw what was in there, she went completely white. So now they know that I know everything. Not just about their affair, but the money, the lies they told about each other to cover their tracks, and all the nasty things they said about me in their texts. But here's the thing, that was just phase 1, the immediate escape. Phase 2 is, well, I don't want to say too much yet because this post is already way too long, but let's just say I'm not done. Not even close. I'm now sitting in my new apartment. It's small but clean, with big windows that Parker loves lying in front of. My phone has about 50 missed calls, and twice as many texts from both Danny and Sloan, ranging from apologetic to angry to blaming me somehow. I haven't responded to a single one. Instead, I ordered myself a pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and started making a list of what comes next. Because while the initial shock value of my exit was satisfying, the slow burn revenge is just beginning. To be continued. Edit. Thanks for all the comments. To answer some questions, no, we don't have kids, thank God. Yes, I'm talking to a therapist now. And no, I won't be posting screenshots of their texts for proof because that's just gross and probably illegal. Second update. Okay, so I've been reading all your comments on my previous posts and NGL. It's been super validating. Honestly, didn't expect this many people to care about my drama, LOL. A lot of you asked for an update on what happened after the Thanksgiving showdown, so here we go. So it's been about 2 weeks since I dropped the bomb at Thanksgiving dinner. My phone literally exploded with notifications that night. Missed calls from Danny, texts from Sloan ranging from angry to weirdly apologetic, and messages from basically everyone in my family. I ignored most of them and just watched the Great British Bake Off with Parker on the couch in my new place. Something about watching people stress over cakes is weirdly calming when your own life is a dumpster fire. The next morning, I finally checked my messages. My mom had called 17 times. Not exaggerating. There was a voicemail where she was just crying, which made me feel awful because none of this was her fault. My dad sent a text that just said, "Call me when you're ready, proud of you," which made me tear up a bit. Albert sent me a string of texts basically saying Sloan was dead to him and asking if I needed help moving stuff. Danny's messages were a journey. Started with anger. How could I embarrass him like that? I was overreacting, blah, blah. Then panic. Where was I staying? Why couldn't he get into the house? Then bargaining. We could work this out. It was just a mistake. He still loved me. The final message sent at 3 a.m. was just, "I'm sorry. Too little, too late, my dude." Sloan's texts were somehow worse. She actually had the nerve to say I should have told her I knew so we could have handled this like adults. Because nothing says adult like sleeping with your sister's husband behind her back for 7 months, right? She also tried the whole, "we didn't mean for this to happen" line, which is such BS. People don't accidentally fall into each other's beds for more than half a year. I finally called my mom back around noon. She was still crying, but also furious at Sloan and Danny. Apparently, after I left, all hell broke loose. My dad yelled at Danny until he left. Sloan tried to defend herself, but nobody was having it. Even our Aunt Pamela, who never takes sides in family drama, told her she was disgusting. Sloan eventually stormed out, and everyone else just sat in awkward silence trying to process what happened. Mom said the pumpkin pie never got eaten, which somehow made me really sad. That Friday, I went back to the house while I knew Danny would be at work to grab more of my stuff. I'd already taken the important things, but I wanted my winter clothes, some kitchen gadgets I actually paid for, and more of Parker's toys. I half expected to find the place trashed, but it was actually weirdly clean. Like, Danny had been stress cleaning level of tidy. There was a note on the kitchen table that just said, "Can we talk?" with his number underneath as if I'd somehow forgotten it after 6 years. I ignored it, loaded up my car, and left within an hour. The weekend was a blur of setting up my new apartment, ignoring more calls, and stress eating takeout while scrolling TikTok to distract myself. On Monday, I went back to work and immediately got called into my boss's office. For a second, I panicked, thinking Danny had somehow caused trouble for me there. Instead, my boss Ariana just gave me a hug, awkward but sweet, and told me to take whatever time I needed. Apparently, Danny had called looking for me, and she'd told him to kick rocks, her exact words. I didn't even know she had that in her. That's when things got interesting. Remember when I said I'd been gathering evidence and making plans? Well, this is where that comes in. First, the house. Danny kept texting about our house and what we were going to do with it. What he didn't know was that I'd already spoken to our mortgage lender. See, the house was actually more mine than his. My parents had helped with the down payment, and my name was first on all the paperwork. I'd already started the process to refinance in just my name, which my lawyer said was possible given the circumstances. The best part? Danny had no idea because he never bothered reading any of our financial paperwork. Second, the money. Danny and I had a joint account for bills and shared expenses, plus our own separate accounts. About 4 months ago, he'd suggested we consolidate everything into the joint account to simplify our finances. I'd agreed but dragged my feet on actually moving my personal savings over. Thank God for my procrastination, right? Turns out he'd been slowly draining the joint account, not emptying it completely, but skimming enough to take Sloan on their little dates and buy her gifts. With my screenshots of the bank statements lined up with their text messages planning these dates, my lawyer was having a field day. Third, and this is where it gets really good, Danny's job. He works, or worked, at a financial firm with a very strict morality clause in their contracts. Employees can literally get fired for bringing disrepute to the company's image. Around the time I found out about the affair, there was a company dinner I attended with Danny. Sloan was also there as the date of one of his coworkers, Bryson. Yeah, she was two-timing my husband, who was cheating on me with her. It's like Inception, but with betrayal. Anyway, at that dinner, I'd taken some photos of everyone, including one of Danny, Sloan, and Bryson together, the three of them smiling, completely unaware of the mess they were in. After Thanksgiving, I sent that photo along with a very polite, very detailed email to Danny's boss explaining the situation. I made sure to mention I wasn't trying to cause trouble, but felt the company should know about the complicated personal dynamics since Bryson was also involved. I didn't explicitly ask for Danny to be fired, just expressed concern about the work environment. Danny's boss called me yesterday. Turns out the company was already having issues with Danny's recent work performance. Shocker. And this was the last straw. They were letting him go, effective immediately. The boss actually apologized to me, which was surreal. So now Danny has no job, no house, at least not for much longer. And according to what Albert told me, Sloan has been staying with him because her roommate found out what she did and doesn't want her there anymore. Talk about karma. But here's the thing. I'm not done yet. The divorce papers have been filed, but there's still one more card I'm waiting to play. Remember how I said Sloan is always trying to one-up me? Well, there's one area where she's always been super competitive: social media. She's obsessed with her Instagram aesthetic and has been trying to become an influencer for years. She's always posting these perfect photos of her life, her outfits, her food, you know the type. She even has a decent following, about 20,000 people, which she never lets anyone forget. What Sloan doesn't know is that I have a folder of screenshots from her and Danny's text exchanges, the ones where they trash talk not just me, but literally everyone they know, including several brands she has partnerships with, including comments about how she fakes using products she's paid to promote, including some pretty racist remarks about one company's founder. I haven't decided exactly when to send these to her sponsors, but I'm thinking right after the holidays, right when most influencers are securing their Q1 deals for the new year. Perfect timing, right? I know some people might think I'm being too calculating or cold about all this. Maybe I am. But when you spend weeks lying awake at night wondering what you did wrong, why you weren't enough, how the two people who were supposed to love you most could betray you so completely, well, something inside you changes. I'm not trying to ruin their lives. I just want them to experience consequences for once. And honestly, it feels good to take back some control. Mom's been calling daily to check on me. Dad brought me homemade soup yesterday. Store-bought, but he transferred it to his own containers, which was adorable. Albert and his wife invited me to stay with them for Christmas so I don't have to be alone. I haven't decided what I'll do yet. Yesterday I was unpacking some boxes and found the Christmas ornaments Danny and I collected from our trips together. I sat on the floor and cried for an hour, which I guess means I'm not as emotionally bulletproof as I've been pretending to be. Parker kept bringing me his toys, trying to cheer me up. Dogs really are the best, so that's where things stand now. Danny is calling less frequently, which is a relief. Sloan has switched from apologetic to angry in her messages, blaming me for overreacting and destroying Danny's career. I've blocked her number. My lawyer says the divorce should be relatively straightforward given the evidence of infidelity. She actually high-fived me when I told her about the email to Danny's company. Part of me feels a little guilty about how things are playing out, but then I remember the look on Sloan's face when she made her big announcement at Thanksgiving, like she was enjoying hurting me, and the guilt fades pretty quick. I'll update again after I make my final move. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time, binging Netflix shows I never had time to watch before, and trying to figure out who I am outside of Danny's wife or Sloan's sister. Oh, and I dyed my hair purple yesterday. Something I always wanted to do, but Danny said would look unprofessional. It's petty, but every time I catch my reflection, I smile a little. Small victories, right? Edit. Thanks for all the awards and support, you guys. Reading your comments has been really helpful through all this. I'll post the final update after the holidays once everything is settled. Final update. Okay, final update time. Sorry it took me forever to post this. My TikTok algorithm somehow knew I was going through it and kept showing me cat videos until 3 in the morning every night, LOL. Plus, my therapist suggested I take a social media break, which I mostly ignored. But I did try to limit how much I was obsessing over this whole situation online. So where did I leave off? Right, the mediation that wasn't really a mediation. The week after that disaster, I was sitting on my IKEA couch in my new apartment, the one with the leg that keeps coming loose no matter how many times I tighten it, scrolling through Netflix and trying to decide if I was in a true crime or baking show mood when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Albert asking if I was doing okay. I sent back a thumbs up emoji because honestly, I was too tired to type out actual words. Then came another text. Mom wants to host a family dinner this Sunday. Danny and Sloan will be there. She says it's to clear the air or whatever. You don't have to come. I stared at the text for so long that my screen went dark. Clear the air? Was she serious? The thought of sitting across from them again made my stomach do that weird flippy thing. But then I remembered that folder I'd been keeping under my bed, the one with all the screenshots, bank statements, and other receipts. Maybe it was time to bring that out. I texted back, "I'll be there. Tell Mom I'm bringing dessert." Sunday rolled around and I spent way too long deciding what to wear. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I needed armor. I settled on my favorite jeans, the ones that somehow didn't get wonky in the dryer, a dark blue sweater, and the earrings my grandmother left me. Nothing special, but I felt somewhat put together. I brought Parker with me because A, he's family too, and B, he's basically my emotional support animal now. He immediately ran to my dad when we arrived, completely ignoring Danny, which honestly made me stupidly proud. The tension in my parents' house was so thick you could have cut it with those cheap IKEA knives they've had forever. Mom was stress cleaning the already spotless kitchen. Dad was pretending to watch basketball but kept muting it every time someone entered the room. Albert and his wife were sitting at the dining table, scrolling through their phones and occasionally exchanging glances. Danny and Sloane were sitting on the couch, not quite touching, but definitely together. Sloane was wearing a dress I recognized from my own closet, one that had mysteriously disappeared months ago. That actually made me laugh out loud, which caused everyone to stare at me. Dinner was absolutely ridiculous. Mom kept trying to make conversation about neutral topics like the weather and some show she was watching. Dad kept aggressively passing dishes without speaking. Albert asked about everyone's fantasy football teams as if that would somehow fix everything. Finally, after the most uncomfortable 45 minutes of my life, Sloane cleared her throat and looked at me. I knew what was coming. Another performance. She started talking about how sometimes people just fall in love and can't help it, and how sorry she was about how everything happened, but she and Danny were meant to be, and hoping everyone could just move forward as a family. I let her finish her little speech. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my folder. So before we move forward, I thought everyone might want to know exactly what we're moving forward from. The next 20 minutes were just me calmly going through everything I discovered. The 7-month affair. The money Danny had been moving from our joint account to his personal one, almost $15,000. The fact that they'd been using our house when I was on that work trip to Chicago. The messages where they literally made fun of me for being so clueless. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just laid it all out there. Spreadsheets and all. Yes, I made spreadsheets. Sue me. The best part was watching their faces change as they realized I wasn't just hurt. I was prepared. Danny kept trying to interrupt with explanations, but Dad shut him down each time with just a look. When I finished, the room was completely silent. Then my mom got up, went to the kitchen, and came back with a bottle of the good wine, the one she saves for Christmas. She poured me a glass and said, "I think it's time we discuss the family cabin." For context, my grandparents had a small cabin by the lake that they left to my parents. It's nothing fancy. Just 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen with appliances from the 90s, and a porch with the most amazing view. We all grew up spending summers there. Sloane had been talking for years about how she wanted it when my parents were done with it. Nice, right? Mom explained that she and Dad had been talking, and they'd decided to put the cabin in my name. Not because of what happened with Danny and Sloane, but because they'd always planned to give it to me and just hadn't gotten around to the paperwork. The look on Sloane's face was priceless. All these years of trying to one-up me, and she'd lost the one thing she actually cared about in our family. Danny started saying something about how their mistake shouldn't affect family decisions, and that's when Albert finally spoke up. He looked Danny directly in the eye and said, "Dude, you've been living in my sister's house, spending her money and sleeping with her sister behind her back. You don't get a vote on family stuff anymore." I almost hugged him right there. Sloane stormed out, and Danny followed her like the sad puppy he is. I stayed and had dessert with my family, and for the first time in months, I actually felt okay. The divorce was finalized last week. Danny didn't contest anything after my lawyer showed their lawyer all the evidence I had. I got the house, which I'm selling, too many memories, my full retirement account, and the cabin. He got his clothes and his car, which still has that weird noise in the engine that he never bothered to fix. As for Sloane and Danny, last I heard from Albert, they moved in together to some apartment across town. Danny's struggling to pay his half of the rent since his job cut his hours. Apparently 3 of his coworkers were friends with me on Facebook and saw my very subtle post about starting fresh after discovering some people aren't who they claim to be. Word gets around. Sloane posted a whole thing on Instagram about weathering storms together, with a selfie of them looking exhausted. She's been trying to sell those awful leggings in some MLM thing, constantly messaging old high school friends who haven't spoken to her in years. The best part? They fight constantly. My mom ran into them at Target, in the ramen noodle aisle, which seems fitting, and said they were bickering about whose turn it was to pay for groceries. Sloane was complaining that she'd paid last time, and Danny was saying she only bought her food, not their food. Turns out when your relationship is built on sneaking around and lying, it's not actually that great when you have to deal with real life together. Who knew? As for me, I'm doing okay. Some days are harder than others. Last week I found one of Danny's old t-shirts in the back of a drawer and had a good cry about everything. The following day I used it to clean up when Parker got sick on the kitchen floor, which felt therapeutic in a weird way. I'm closing on the house sale next month and moving to a condo closer to downtown. I've been spending weekends fixing up the cabin. Turns out I'm actually decent at basic home repairs thanks to YouTube tutorials. I've started going to this pottery class on Thursday nights where I make lopsided mugs that my parents pretend to love. Oh, and I've been talking to this guy I met at the dog park. Nothing serious, we've just been texting about our dogs and sending each other memes. But he makes me laugh, and Parker actually likes him, which is more than I can say for how he felt about Danny. I don't know what happens next. I'm still working through everything with my therapist, who, BTW, had some choice words about Sloane's behavior that made me snort laugh during our session. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not worried about what Sloane's doing or if Danny's happy with her. They got each other. I got everything else. And honestly, that's enough for me. TLDR. Sister and ex-husband got together and lost family support, financial stability, and respect. I got the house, cabin, and a chance to start over. They're fighting over ramen noodles while I'm rebuilding my life. Edit. Thanks for all the awards and supportive comments. My phone's been blowing up with notifications. To answer some common questions. Yes, I'm still speaking to my parents. They've been surprisingly great through all this. No, I haven't forgiven Sloane and don't plan to anytime soon. Dog tax as requested. Parker tax would be here if I could post pics. For those asking about the dog park guy, chill. LOL. We're just friends right now, but I'll update if anything changes.